I've had a lot of requests to do videos on more Canadian bands, and I've also had a ton of requests to do a video on the band Kittie, so here we are. Hailing from London, Ontario, Kittie would start out as 4 teenage girls and would be dubbed in the press as being the anti-Britney Spears or anti-Christina Aguilera or anti-Spice Girls. One article even said, "Forget Spice Girls, this is girl power." They would be trailblazers for women in the world of metal, but they also faced a ton of obstacles along the way. Some people would simply write them off as a novelty. They dealt with misogyny, litigation, and a revolving lineup as well. In today's video, let's talk about the history of Kittie. Kittie would form in 1996 when drummer Mercedes Lander met guitarist Fallon Bowman in high school in gymnastics class. They talked and discovered that they were into the same types of music, bands like Silverchair, Nirvana, as well as Stone Temple Pilots, and they had also discovered they were playing their own respective instruments for about 2 years. Even though they shared similar musical tastes, their personalities were wildly different. Mercedes was very outgoing, vivacious, while Fallon was more quiet and introverted, but they still complemented one another. Mercedes got Fallon to come more out of her shell, and Mercedes wasn't always a drummer. She initially started out playing piano, then she moved to guitar before she discovered the drums. The pair would start jamming mostly simply out of boredom in their hometown of London. They assembled in the Lander family basement and jammed for a few months before they realized that they needed a frontwoman. They would soon be joined by Mercedes' older sister Morgan, who studied classical music and played guitar. She would front the group, and they soon started jamming on covers of Nirvana, Tool, and Silverchair. Maybe it was foreshadowing, but Silverchair for a lot of their career were labeled as being a teen band and a novelty act, and Kittie got pretty much the same kind of coverage from the press early in their career. I do want to point out that in the band's profile on Spin magazine, the publication claimed that London, Ontario at that point in time had the highest millionaires per capita in Canada. The girls, however, weren't fans of London, with frontwoman Morgan telling Spin, "It's not a bad place, it's a sh." The girls were soon influenced by heavier music, taking inspiration from groups like Cannibal Corpse as well as Slayer. The Lander sisters also cited their parents as being another huge influence in their musical tastes, growing up on Led Zeppelin, AC/DC, Kiss, as well as Ted Nugent. Funny enough though, Morgan would admit to the Charlotte Observer that she wasn't a fan of any particular female artists. The trio would spend the next 2 years jamming and working on their sound before even playing their first live shows. As for their name, before coming up with Kittie, they tossed around a few other monikers, including Sam Hain, which was of course taken. They eventually narrowed it down to Swan or Kittie, with them going with Kittie. Morgan would tell the Montreal Gazette, "We wanted it to be from one extreme to the next, something completely contradictory." The band now needed a bass player. Fallon and Mercedes knew another girl, Tanya Candler, and she didn't know how to play bass, only having played guitar. She did, however, learn to play bass, and by the time Candler joined, the trio had already written a few songs. Kittie would book their first show, which was a Battle of the Bands competition at a club called Call the Office. This is maybe the part of the story where I tell you they destroyed the other bands, and well, that didn't really happen. In fact, it was a pretty awful gig. Morgan would recall to the Toronto Star, "We lost horribly. We were the last band on at like 1:30 in the morning, playing to 10 to 15 drunk guys." Meanwhile, the group would play another Battle of the Bands competition in their high school and were kicked off stage for wearing dog collars, being too loud, vulgar, and were told that girls shouldn't play that type of music. Funny enough though, following them on stage was a Limp Bizkit cover band who were warmly received. Kittie soon played other gigs, and their early shows would see them initially only play once or twice a week, since Morgan's guttural growl would result in her straining her voice. As the girls started playing more shows, their style also started to change. They would wear thick trash girl makeup, spiked bracelets, studs, and leather. Kittie got their first big break when they played a showcase in Toronto in early 1999 at Canadian Music Week. Canadian Music Week was a lot different back then, as unsigned bands would perform and labels would descend on the city of Toronto to scout the acts. It would be vice president and manager of NG Records, Jason Weiner, who saw the band perform and signed them. The Lander sisters' father soon quit his job as an executive at Daimler Chrysler to manage the band full-time. Kittie would end up signing a 4-album deal with NG Records and soon recorded their debut album Spit in just 9 days. The gravity of the opportunity didn't really hit the members of the band at the time, with Morgan telling Louder Sound, "We thought this would be a fun summer project. We were going to press 5,000 copies of Spit, and that was going to be it." During the recording of the record, the members were also balancing school while they were in the studio, and it wasn't really uncommon for them to be doing homework while they were recording. The songs on Spit would be recorded from the time the band formed 3 years prior up until the point they actually went into the studio, re-recording a lot of the songs and changing arrangements around. The album was set for a November '99 release, but the prior summer saw the band already getting a ton of buzz, being mentioned in publications like Rolling Stone as the next big band to watch. But the months leading up to the band's album release proved to be stressful as Kittie faced multiple setbacks. One was that their label, NG Records, was soon bought out by Artemis. A lot of the bands on NG's roster were soon dropped, and Kittie were a little nervous that the same thing could happen to them. Their record was released in November of '99, but quickly removed from store shelves after the merger happened. Thankfully for them, they had already had so much hype before the buyout that the folks at Artemis saw the potential in the band. The head of Artemis also happened to be ex-Nirvana manager Danny Goldberg, who would tell Billboard, "The first time I heard Brackish, it was a one-listen epiphany. There's a vacuum for this music and hard rock culture, and it's obvious to me that Kittie would fill that void." Artemis would properly release their record Spit in January of 2000. The second setback was that the group's bassist Candler would quit the band following a show in September of '99. Candler would admit that the reason she left was because she was having issues with drugs and struggling with an eating and anxiety disorder. Keep in mind she was only 16 at the time. For a short period of time, Kittie became a trio when doing press for the album. Some photo shoots they had already done with Candler, so she had to be airbrushed out. Candler would be replaced by a girl that the members knew at their local London mall named Talina Atfield. Atfield, though, like Candler, hadn't played bass before and had only been playing guitar for about a year or so. The band had a photo shoot coming up in a few weeks, and Atfield joined the band as their new bassist. Kittie's first major tour saw them open for Slipknot, and they later toured with Sevendust, with both bands really embracing Kittie. Morgan would recall to Louder Sound what that first tour with Slipknot was like, remembering, "We left for that tour and I just never went back to high school. Those first 5,000 copies that we thought we were only going to seek for the entirety of our career flew off the shelves in a couple of days." And then it started to sink in the true size of what was to come. The articles covering Kittie, of course, all focused on the band being girls in a mostly male-dominated space. Morgan would admit to the Daily Record and the Montreal Gazette that they tried as much as possible to not focus on superficialities, while adding that there were other reasons the band was garnering so much attention, admitting, "For us, it was never really something that was a big deal. It just so happens that we're 4 friends, 4 human beings. That's the way I see it. We're very truthful. I would personally hope that's one of the main reasons." Kittie, for their part, would describe their sound as glam goth metal glitter, and the timing of their upward trajectory seemed perfect given the popularity of metal acts like Korn, Limp Bizkit, Deftones, as well as Slipknot. But that's not to say that the frequent attention to their gender and age didn't get to them, because it did. They were continually asked the same questions in pretty much every interview: how old they were, what it felt like to be women in a genre mostly dominated by men, and as well as their thoughts on Britney Spears and pop music. Some also wrote the band off as being a novelty act, with Morgan telling the Charlotte Observer, "It never occurred to us that people were going to make such a big stinking deal about it." Here's an exchange they had with the LA Times in 2000. Other publications and music fans claimed that the band's music was laced with sexually explicit references for the sake of selling albums, something Morgan and the band pushed back against. While Kittie's first LP consisted of song titles like Paper Doll, Spit, Suck, Choke, which may seem titular at first, They had deeper interpretations and meanings, discussing topics like relationships, abuse, prejudice, and sexism. Morgan would add to the Montreal Gazette, "We're writing about everyday experiences, things everyone can relate to, and say, I've gone through that, and a lot of time, experiences don't turn out for the better." There were some in the press who also tried to shape a narrative that Kittie were part of a post-Riot Girl movement, with Morgan telling the Calgary Herald, "The only ones who bring up the feminist or sexist stuff are the journalists. They want it to be post-Riot Girl movement, which is not happening. Too bad for them. If anything, we're part of the metal movement, not necessarily gender-oriented either." Of course, it wasn't just the press who were giving the band trouble, as they also dealt with a fair bit of misogyny from some members of their audiences at shows, who called for them to expose themselves, while others at the front of the stage tried to grab at the members, or in one case, a guy ran on stage and punched Morgan. Despite all these obstacles, their debut LP, Spit, would end up going gold thanks in large part to the lead single Brackish, which MTV and American rock radio embraced. Brackish was also the oldest song in the band's repertoire and would be influenced by Static X. It was nearly left off the record due to the band having trouble nailing the arrangement. They also had some success with the MTV buzz clip Charlotte. Kittie would be Artemis Records' first act to break through, as Spit would top the Billboard Heatseekers chart. Being Canadian, it's pretty normal for my country to crow about acts who have been cultural ambassadors to other countries. One name that's frequently brought up in interviews with Kittie would be Alanis Morissette. But Kittie wasn't really that embraced in Canada at first. Morgan would tell my hometown paper, the Edmonton Journal, "It's weird, we tried to accumulate some sort of Toronto popularity, they kind of turned their back to us, and it was kind of disappointing." The band played Toronto for nearly 2 years before landing a major recording contract, and finally found success once they headed south of the border. Morgan would reveal to the Journal that Canadian radio stations were reluctant to play the band's music, and Spit wouldn't even make it into the SoundScan Top 50 alternative or metal albums in Canada, as Much Music seemed to be the only place in the country that played Kittie's music. In 2000, in addition to releasing their debut LP, they also put out an EP titled Paper Doll, and they would finish the year with Spit making many Best of the Year lists. The press would even bestow upon them the surname the Cowgirls from Hell. It was in the summer of 2000 the band landed a spot at Ozfest, playing the second stage opening for Soulfly. It was following Ozfest, their record label pushed the band to get back into the studio to record their follow-up album, but the band wanted to continue to tour. You also have to remember that Spit was written over a span of 3 years, while their record label only gave them 3 months to write their follow-up record. The pressure was getting to the band, resulting in the fun being gone and politics, money, and the parents getting more involved. And of course, it would also result in a lot of infighting. In August of 2001, it was revealed that guitarist Fallon Bowman had quit the band 3 weeks before they were set to hit the studio for their follow-up record. Oracle would see the band go in a heavier direction and enlist guitarist Jeff Phillips, who had previously served as the band's guitar tech. Morgan and Mercedes were always the core of the band, and the group's bassist Atfield soon became disillusioned with everything and just wasn't around as much. She would leave the band in 2002 and would be replaced by seasoned bassist Jennifer Arroyo. Kittie's relationship with their record label Artemis also soon started to fracture. The label pushed the group to work with outside songwriters, and Kittie soon filed a lawsuit against Artemis, claiming they hadn't properly supported the band and that they were owed $1 million in royalties. The lawsuit would end up delaying the band's third LP, but it would eventually be settled out of court. Kittie would undergo another lineup change when guitarist Jeff Phillips left the band to pursue another musical project. Lisa Marks would join the band, and Kittie would return in 2004 with the album Until the End. The lyrical themes and artwork were indicative of the band's personal and business frustration at the time. Kittie wouldn't tour a lot for the album, and some dates were scrapped in the summer of 2004 due to Mercedes ending up in the hospital due to internal bleeding that was thought to have been caused by stress. By 2005, they lost the recording contract with Artemis and couldn't afford to keep their bassist and guitar player on a retainer anymore. Soon enough, Marks and Arroyo quit the band, leaving the Morgan sisters by themselves. Without a full band and a record deal, the sisters contemplated breaking up Kittie. The pair soon started a clothing brand called Poison Black Clothing and launched their own label called Kiss of Infamy Records and appeared on other bands' albums. But Kiss's Gene Simmons soon hit them with a cease and desist letter, and the sisters changed their label name to X of Infamy, and by early 2005, the pair recorded some new demos under the moniker Sweet Revenge and started shopping it around to different record labels in hopes of getting some interest. But the labels were more interested in a new album by Kittie. Realizing that bringing Kittie back was going to be the only way they could make a viable career in the music business, the sisters recruited new members, guitarist Tara McLeod and bassist Trish Stone. In 2007, they'd return with a softer-sounding record, Funeral for a Day, in an attempt to get more radio play. It would be the first record the band put out on their own label, and while the band seemed to clash with producer Jack Ponti, the record gave the band their highest charting single of their career on active rock radio with the title track. Then, during the tour for the album, the band ran into issues once again. Bassist Trish Stone left the group as she was going through some mental health issues. She would return a few years later. The Lander sisters, meanwhile, soon received tragic news that their father and manager had passed away. The band would look back at their latest release and claim that they weren't happy with the production on the album and felt that it didn't adequately represent the band, not feeling heavy enough. The band's subsequent record, 2008's In the Black, saw a more collaborative effort and a heavier sounding album. They would return in 2011 with I Failed You, a record that sold about 3,000 copies in its first week of release, charting at number 178 on the Billboard album chart. It would be their final album for nearly a decade. But by 2011, the economics of being a working musician had long changed. Gone were the big budget music videos or getting played on MTV, or let alone making money off of album sales. Touring was the only avenue for bands like Kittie to make money. In 2014, Morgan would reveal to London Groove Machine, there just isn't enough demand or money for us to support ourselves fully with the band. We haven't broken up or anything like that. It's just that we've decided that focusing on other career choices were equally as important at this time. As for what Morgan was up to at the time, she worked several jobs, including at a software company with her sister and at the head office for a chain of fitness clubs in marketing. Her sister, meanwhile, would get her real estate license, and she would start the metal outfit White Swan. Sadly, in 2017, bassist Trish Stone would die at the young age of 31. At the time of her death, the cause was not released. Then in 2017, the band played a hometown reunion show that featured 3 different sets with 3 different lineups of the band performing. It seemed like a sonic farewell, because in the subsequent years, a reunion seemed unlikely, as the members claimed there wasn't enough interest or money. But then in 2021, Kittie started receiving offers from promoters to do some shows, and that kick-started the group's comeback. Couple this with nu metal's resurgence around this time, and Kittie played their first show in nearly 5 years in September of 2022 at the Blue Ridge Rock Festival in Virginia. Then the following month, they played the When We Were Young Festival in Las Vegas. Kittie soon signed a new recording contract with Sumerian Records and began work on a new album in early 2023. The band is returning next month with their first album in over a decade, titled Fire. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. As always, if you have suggestions for future topics, let me know in the comments section below. Take care.